Hello everyone, this is Solaris290, and I'm here to give you my thoughts on chapter 555 of Kingdom. So this chapter moves us away from the situation with Heki against the Quan Wong and Yotanwa's army, and gives us a basic overview of all of the different Qin armies and how they're faring upon the 9th day of battle. So starting off, we get a nice look at Kanki's situation. While there were a number of theories about Kanki possibly manipulating the message about Gyor having 20 days worth of food left, here we see that there is no such apparent plan going on there. Instead, both Maron and Kokuro are rather concerned about how the siege is going. Ultimately, they're the ones on the back foot at this point, and Maron soon tells Kanki that as the Zhao forces have finally ceased their attacks in all 4 directions, it seemingly confirms that Gyor's stores of food will indeed be outlasting their own. And from inside Gyor we see that citizens are hanging on, but their food stores are equally depleted. However, it's clear here that in the long term they'll be in the more favourable margin than the besieging Qin forces will. Maron then asks as to whether there have been any communication from the Orson or Yotanwa armies, and Kanki knows that any messengers who would have come their way would have got killed, as we saw with Heki's messengers. Any of them who attempted to break through the Quan Wong's lines and send for aid were immediately cut down. As such, it's clear that the only way for the Kanki army to survive will be to triumph over their opponent and hopefully gain a huge amount of food. This of course can't be done by the Kanki army themselves, who are still in the middle of besieging, but all rest hope on either the Orsen or Yotanwa armies triumphing and bringing them food in response. But despite having this fairly calm conversation, it's clear that Maron is on the edge here. He tries to get Kanki to promise that the very moment they only have a single day of rations remaining, they will lift the siege on Gyor and withdraw. And Kanki here seems to be taking this very lightly, as he always does. He agrees, but only in the condition that they ever do reach that point. With Kanki here it's interesting, he never seems to show any sign of fear or concern, and that's largely left to his advisors to have to deal with the consequences. But ultimately, depending on how the situation goes, it will be interesting to see how Kanki handles a tactical withdrawal. Of course, we saw in the Kokyo arc that being bandits, their idea of a withdrawal is complete chaotic, running away every man for themselves. And while that works in the context of a pitched battle, it's going to be much more difficult in terms of a siege like this one. In any case, we move on back to the Shukai Plains, and at this point it seems the two armies are at a standoff. Bihei's trying his best to taunt, but of course, being Bihei, it completely fails. But it's clear here that the Qin forces at Shukai Plains are also suffering the effects of their lack of rations. And then it moves to Ten, who notes now that the enemy has completely switched to a battle of attrition, i.e. attempting to starve each other out. Now all Ten's doing here is really trying to clarify the situation for the Qin advisors in the room, but Ohon rather rudely cuts her off, stating that she shouldn't be taking charge. Now, how dare you, Ohon, do that? All Ten's attempting to do is give some clarity, make sure the situation is clear here. But in any case, Ohon then soon starts doing the exact same thing, which Shin thankfully notes the hypocrisy of it all. But ultimately, Ohon comes to the same conclusion as Ten, that their food stores are the ones that are in retreat here, and that they only have around enough food now for 4 or 5 more days. As such, it's clear that the right wing of the army needs to smash through the opponents within the next 3 days. Ultimately, in order to win, they'll have to engage and defeat Uboku in just 1 day of fighting, and then head to Gyor to regroup with the Kanki army. Shin notes, though, that even if this plan goes ahead, by that time they'll still have run out of food. And here we have Ohon taking a rather coldly pragmatic view of things, that ultimately they'll have to do much as the Kanki army does, and pillage the surrounding villages and settlements for food. And while Shin is rather outraged at this, ultimately it's clear that in the context of a war, yes, these settlements might be civilian settlements, but ultimately they're in enemy territory in the first place. They're an invading army, the Qin are. And so I agree with Ohon in that sense that he shouldn't be holding a moral high ground here. And Shin is still protesting but gets cut off by Ten, who tries to reassure him by saying that ultimately it's only taking their food, they'll make sure to split it up properly, that we keep records of the amount, and promise to pay it back. But in reality, all Ten's saying here is attempting to pacify him through reassurances. In the context of the brutal war they're fighting, it's unlikely that will happen at all. Shin then brings up, well, what if the civilians of Zhao refuse to share that food with them? And ultimately neither Ten nor Hon have an answer to this. Now we move on to Gunei, who's the Ako army deputy, and in the end all he really sees as important is how to destroy their enemies. Ultimately what he notes is that they can't defeat the Zhao in a single move, and that's because the left wing of Zhao doesn't have a commander here who stands above the rest, as is the case with the Qin army in Olsen, which is much more hierarchical. Ultimately all of the four commanders, Gakue, Chogalyu, Gyon and Bananji, are all technically equal with one another. And while Ten sees that as a disadvantage, that taking one of them out wouldn't lead to a total collapse of the Zhao forces, Ohon sees it in a more positive light, namely that the way they can go about this is by taking each of the commanders out one at a time, piecemeal style. Gunen agrees with that, and figures that they need to remove one army today, one army on the second day, and the remaining two on the third day. And right off the bat it's clear that the weakest link here is Gakue. Both the Gyokuho and Hishin units are entrusted to take him down, despite their protestations having to work together, but the Ako army is confident they'll be able to handle the other three, despite the death of Mako. And we get a nice heart-to-heart between Gunen and Banyor, in which they're talking about how Ohon had grown into such a strong fighter and a great young master. But unfortunately, the narration tells us that despite this plan to take Gakue's head, it would prove to spectacularly backfire against the Qin forces. The reason for that is, as of course always, Riboku. Riboku comes with Kaine in order to meet Bananji. And it's clear here that Bananji has some sort of possibly ability, they refer to it as condition, but something that might enable him to fight far stronger than he has seemed to have been against Ohon at the moment. The way it's described is somewhat of almost a berserker state. Bananji tells Riboku that despite the rage he has felt fighting the Qin, it's not been the same as that intense rage he's fought against battling the Xiongnu at Ganmon. Kaine is rather disappointed here. She wonders why should a man be letting his mood be controlled by his condition, given that it's a war. Bananji counters that it's exactly because it's a war. He states that it's a little too much for Kaine to understand, and so they're having a bit of a back and forth here. Now it's interesting that he would say that, because Riboku has previously fought in Ganmon, as has Kaine. That's not even getting into their backstory. When I say backstory, I mean the Li Mu prequel, but that's something I'll touch upon another time. But nonetheless, Riboku notes that Bananji still has strength to spare, and he believes that the Qin shall make a move today, and that most damaging to the Qin that Riboku knows of is supposedly the Ako army's weakness. And with that, that's the chapter ending. This was a good chapter in the sense of being able to get an idea of how the main Qin forces are faring, but it still ends off with a troubling note of Riboku having another knowledge of weakness of the Qin, this time being Ako. He already knows Kanki, but we won't know until next week, nonetheless. The cover page is a lovely colour cover page, and it's a lovely callback to the first arc of Kingdom. You have characters like Giku and Saji there, for heaven's sake. I'm really looking forward to the live action movie, if I haven't mentioned already, Although the cast, I'm not entirely sure how they'll fare, I'm pretty confident that given the PV we saw, the live action movie should be great. Kingdom as a live action movie should fare much better compared anyway. But this is RS290, signing out. Give me your thoughts and comments below.